Now, he's not, alas, got his feet under the desk at Foggy Bottom as the new Secretary of State for the United States, which he would be if I had my way. But the second prize is he's back on the mother of all talk shows. Chris Hedges, political commentator, journalist, writer, and host of the Chris Hedges Report. Let's start with Washington, then go to our favourite place, Chris, the Middle East. In Washington, it was, as I said earlier, the familiar Trump braggadocio. The whole world was going to be in awe of them, in love with them, but if not in love with them, then in fear with them. There seems a lack of, at least public, understanding in Washington that the tectonic plates have shifted in the world and that the United States is no longer the only tough hombre on the ranch. How did it look to you?
Yeah, I would say that's also true with the Biden administration, that they were playing a role that they no longer, that anyone else would allow them to assume on the world stage. I mean, you saw that with the constant intervention in the UN on behalf of Israel. I mean, the votes were so lopsided. And really, since this genocide began, the message has been quite clear. One that Trump, of course, intends to embrace, and that is not only is there no rules-based order, that was a fiction, but that all of those countries, the vast majority of the countries that attempt to reestablish or establish some kind of a rules-based order around the genocide are shut down by the United States, by the UK, Germany, and these countries in the global north that have been funding this genocide. And of course, it's a perpetuation of this fantasy, perhaps blown up a little more or a little more pompously expressed than it is under Biden. But there's a continuum there. And I think the United States, as it becomes more isolated, becomes more self-deluded. And that makes Trump the kind of perfect poster child for where we are.
Yes, I mean, I was watching the nominee for ambassador to the United Nations, and she was talking a language that even Israeli leaders long ago, since Oslo, have ceased to talk in. She appears to believe there is no such thing as a Palestinian people, even though on the White House lawn, the Oslo Agreement was signed between Israel and the then Palestinian leadership. She seems to believe that God gave Judea and Samaria in biblical title to Israel, when in fact, under American law, as everybody else's law, this is illegally held, occupied territory. What should we make of that?
Yeah, that is the rhetorical shift, which is not insignificant. And all of these views are echoed by Mike Huckabee, who's been appointed by Trump to be the ambassador to Israel. I mean, Huckabee, of course, has also said the Palestinian people do not exist, or there is no West Bank, it is Judea and Samaria. And then that's because Trump's ideological void is filled with this Christian fascism, this magical thinking of Christian Zionism. So we don't want to paper over the fact that, for instance, Israel clearly wants to annex the West Bank. Since the ceasefire came into effect, the attacks, especially in the Jenin refugee camp, have been accelerated. Now, the Biden administration would at least pay fealty to the reality that you just expressed, but they wouldn't do anything to stop it. But now you're right. These figures in the Trump administration speak or adopt the same rhetorical fantasy or rhetorical lie that is perpetuated by Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and these far-right representatives of the colonists in the West Bank. And that's the shift. So But we don't want to let the Biden administration or the Democrats get away scot-free, because they were full-throated defenders of the genocide. What was the final figure? $20 billion in supplemental arms shipments and arms sales to Israel since the genocide began. But yes, it is a difference about how the Palestine-Israel conflict is described. And it's not a small difference, but on the ground, to the Palestinians in the West Bank or the Palestinians in Gaza, I'm not sure it makes much difference in terms of vis-a-vis U.S. policy.
Let me digress for a minute, taking advantage of your peerless experience in the region as a former head of the New York Times Middle East Bureau. What would be the point of annexing the West Bank? In that all of the millions who live there would presumably not be allowed to vote, and so would be the living, breathing proof of the apartheid nature of the state of Israel. What would be the point of annexing it, as opposed to continuing to merely brutally subjugate and settle it?
The same point in terms of annexing northern Gaza. It's about depopulation. The goal, and these figures like Smotrich have never hidden this, the goal is, of course, the erasure of the Palestinians, not only from Gaza, but from the West Bank, to have a quote-unquote, we can't say ethnically pure, because Jewish residents of Israel come from all ethnicities, but a quote-unquote religiously pure state. That's the goal. That's their desire. Whether they can achieve it or not is the question. They've not been able to achieve it in Gaza. They will create a humanitarian crisis in southern Gaza of such catastrophic proportions that they hope that there will be pressure on countries, in particular Egypt, if they can make it happen, to expel the people from Gaza. But they have the same demented vision for the West Bank. So I think it's a step towards that ultimate desire, that ultimate end, which is to depopulate, to eradicate Palestinians from what little land they have left.
Let's turn to what I think is an even bigger enchilada, not to minimize the Middle East in any way. But I said in my monologue, the reason I'm happy that Trump is there rather than Harris, though I would prefer that neither of them were there, the reason I'm happier that Trump is there is because he has now officially stated, through little Marco Rubio and through 500 public statements, that he will stop World War III, that the war in Ukraine has to come to an end. In other words, he's not going to go to war against Russia, which saves us if it happens, if we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, if it's real light and not a nuclear flash, that all these other issues we at least survive to argue about. Do you share that view?
Yeah, vis-a-vis Russia, the question is how aggressive he's going to be towards China. And that's a big question. The provocations that are made by, in particular, the U.S. Sixth Fleet and is quite extensive in the South China Sea. The de facto expansion of NATO into neighboring countries around China is real. There's a heavy push or a belief in the Pentagon that the next war will be with China. Can Trump stop that trajectory? I don't know. He certainly has a more rational policy towards Russia and Ukraine, without question. Remember, at the beginning of the Ukrainian conflict, even Henry Kissinger, a man I loathe, of course, said that the conflict should be stopped and there should be a negotiated settlement or an exchange of land for peace, for which he was excoriated. But of course, and that's what's going to happen eventually. It could have happened before all of this. The whole policy in Ukraine was very cynical. It was a classic proxy war where the United States and its allies used Ukraine to its own detriment. They knew in the end Ukraine had no chance in a long war of attrition, as has been proven clear, but they would degrade the Russian military and isolate Putin within Europe, which they've succeeded in doing. So those were always their ends. So yes, I agree with you on Russia. I'm not as sure about China. The war industry in the United States is a self-perpetuating machine because it's about making money. That's a huge part in the expansion of NATO beyond the borders of a unified Germany, coupled with hubris and of a unipolar world, but also billions of dollars in arms sales. As soon as the war in Afghanistan ended, you saw the stocks of Raytheon and these big arms manufacturers plummet. And then they got Ukraine, and so they rocketed back up. The genocide in Gaza is very good for business. It's just been military fiasco after military fiasco, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Ukraine, I would put on the list, Gaza. My question is how Trump will react to the heavy pressure within the war industry to ratchet up a confrontation with China. I don't know, but I think you're right. I think on Russia, he has a policy that is far saner than anyone embraced by the Democratic Party and the Biden administration.
On China, he's made a half-decent start. No, he saved TikTok, which continues to tick and talk. He called President Xi. He plans on meeting him soon. I mean, it's only a start, but it's not a bad one, is it?
No, but the pressure within the war planners, Trump is. There are powerful institutions, starting with the CIA, that Trump is going to have a very difficult time controlling or bending to his will. So yes, I think you're right. He's. I mean, that is the one benefit of Trump. He didn't start any wars during the 4 years he was president. I mean, the war party is really at this point the Democratic Party. There's far more opposition to perpetual war within the Republican Party than in the Democratic Party, which has kind of flipped the traditional roles of the two parties.
It's a useful segue into my last question, and I'm grateful for your time. He said on the eve of the inauguration, he was going to open the files, not just the oldest one, the JFK, but the RFK, the MLK, and the Jeffrey Epstein. Do you think he means it?
I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to tell with Trump. He's very good at playing to the crowd, at what the crowd wants, whether the crowd gets what they want. I mean, remember, his entire administration is now filled with this coterie of obscenely rich, these billionaires who bought up all the boutique mansions in Washington. Of course, the tip of the spear is Elon Musk. So, I think his populism is a kind of faux populism. Remember, he once defended Julian Assange. He didn't do much to help Julian. So I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to predict. But there's certainly he's far more in touch, and especially one saw with the Harris campaign, completely tone deaf. It was just this vapid, celebrity-driven campaign. The Democrats have essentially disintegrated. They can't even read their own public. I mean, 66%? Or no, I think it's over 70% of registered Democrats want an arms embargo on Israel. It doesn't make any difference. I don't know is the short answer. But there are serious questions. I mean, Bobby Kennedy, until he himself was assassinated, always felt that the CIA had a hand in the murder of his brother, JFK.
Quite so. I said lastly, but I can't resist it. The Democrats don't show any present sign of learning a lesson. Is there anybody coming up on the outside rail, any kind of movement in the Democratic Party, or basically are they historically redundant?
They're historically redundant, and that has been one of the most depressing aspects of the election, in that all the postmortems, all they do is seek scapegoats. There's no self-reflection, no self-criticism, no understanding of the anger, legitimate anger on the part of the, 30 million Americans who have been victims of mass layoffs since 1996. And Biden, those 4 years of the Biden administration, I wrote at the time, were our last chance to enact the kind of New Deal reforms that would save us from a figure like Trump, a cultish figure like Trump, and the rule of oligarchs. But I look at this past election as really a battle between the corporatists, who are represented by the Democratic Party, and the oligarchs, represented by the Republican Party. And they have different interests. The corporatists want the decorum. They want trade deals. They want a stability because they make investments, overseas investments that take time to come to fruition. Oligarchs want chaos. They want, as Steve Bannon said, the deconstruction of the administrative state, because it's a rentier form of capitalism. It's a parasitic form of capitalism where they put up toll booths. The more things break down, the more you need private security. Your utilities are privatized. Of course, one of the big pushes they're making is to privatize the postal service here, so we can have a disastrous postal service like you do in the UK. And it's really been the triumph of oligarchic power, which is a different kind of power. That was really at its core what this election was about.